Kite Man Hell Yeah is the long-awaited Harley Quinn spin-off series hitting Max screens today with a 2-big episode debut, and those 2 episodes were called Pilot Hell Yeah and Grand Reopening Hell Yeah. Now I'm Cape Joel, and in case this is your first time with us, this is the video series where I give my thoughts and feelings on the episode that was, while also shouting out any comic book Easter eggs or references I can find. So with that out of the way, let's actually take a little moment to cover the history of Kite Man and how we got here. Trust me, you're gonna be happy having this context later on, I promise. So then, for those who don't know, Kite Man started his life in the 60s as a one-off Batman villain in the pages of the Finger and Sprang series. Right away, the character was a massive joke and would find himself on early comic book lists for the worst villains of all time. After that, the character would lie dormant for almost 2 full decades before Len Wein would decide to take another stab at him, this time adding the extra wrinkle that this guy's real name was Chuck Charles Brown. Yes, as in Charlie Brown, the Peanuts character who's always getting his kite stuck in a tree. Meaning that they brought this joke character out of obscurity only to further grow his legacy as a joke. He'd make sporadic appearances after that, mainly so writers, artists, and even the characters in the story could just point and laugh at how lame he was. But then in 2016, as part of the DC Rebirth initiative, something unexpected happened. Tom King took over the Batman book and started using as many lame or forgotten villains as he could, almost as if he'd been dared to. It was here that Kite Man would return, and it would mark the first time that he would utter his now famous catchphrase of Kite Man Hell Yeah. The internet, as it so often does, ate this up with a frickin' spoon, and before you knew it, Kite Man had become a major meme, so much to the point that Tom King started featuring the character in more and more of his Batman stories, including giving him a brand new tragic origin involving a dead son that the Riddler killed via a poison kite string. Yeah, for some reason people don't bring up that part of the story anymore, I wonder why. Now, someone on the Harley writing staff was clearly a big fan of Kite Man because he ended up being the major breakout character of the first 2 seasons of the show. There he was portrayed as a lovable dope with a heart of pure gold, so much to the point you wondered why the hell did this guy even want to be a villain in the first place. Keep in mind, he was also so dumb he had no idea he was the third part of the show's big love triangle until the very end, when he does probably the only smart thing he ever did in his life, walking away with his head held high and actually a shred of dignity for once. And because people just couldn't stop talking about Kite Man, now he's finally getting his own show. But how is it? Well, the answer is complicated. Right off the bat, the first episode threw me for a hell of a loop. I had no idea when this show was supposed to take place in the bigger Harley timeline. As the Legion of Doom seemingly rebuilt their headquarters and Lex Luthor was back on Earth despite him getting kidnapped by Steppenwolf at the end of the last Harley season, turns out there was actually a blink and you'll miss it sign joke that I had to rewind to catch. Another thing you'll probably notice right away is that Luthor is no longer voiced by series regular Giancarlo Esposito. Instead, this ends up being the final voice performance for the dearly departed Lance Reddick. Which means if this thing ends up being popular enough to have a season 2, they're gonna have to recast him a 3rd time. In fact, a ton of people have been recast from the Harley show, and it never stops being jarring, especially if you're something of a voice actor nerd like I am. Now, it would seem during his time away, Lex managed to capture the fabled anti-life equation, the ultimate prize of DC uber bad guy Darkseid, who in the comics wished to use the equation to counter all free will in the universe and make himself the unquestioned ruler of all things. It's also kind of a Pulp Fiction suitcase joke, so do with that what you will. Now, having something this powerful in his possession means that it's only a matter of time before the Justice League comes looking for it, meaning that Luthor has decided to ratchet up security by hiring as many flying villains as he can to help protect the LOD base, and because Kite Man is a flying villain, Bane offers him the job. Chuck could also really use the extra work right now because as it stands, he can't even pull off a simple bank job without getting the crap beaten out of him by Spoiler, making her in-show debut. Spoiler, aka Stephanie Brown, actually has a really interesting history from the comics. She's the daughter of a D-list loser villain named Cluemaster, as well as a former Robin and Batgirl. I actually hope we get the chance to see more of her in the series moving forward, as well as her handler, who is revealed to be Detective Chimp, and yes, the name basically tells you everything you need to know. He is both a detective and a chimp. We also get reintroduced to Kite Man's new love interest, Lisa Snart, aka Golden Glider. She has a brand new costume from the last time we saw her in the Harley show, and she's been recast with Stephanie Hsu, meaning we're basically meeting a brand new character for the first time. This time around, the writers do seem to remember it's not just ribbons that Golden Glider can do, she's also an accomplished figure skater, and while Chuck's powers look lame on the outside and are lame in reality, Glider's powers only look lame to the untrained eye, when in reality, she's actually something of a powerhouse. In fact, in the comics, Lisa Snart is the sister of Leonard Snart, aka Captain Cold, killed one of the Flash's arch nemesises, meaning that she's actually in a higher echelon of villain from Kite Man, a joke I kept waiting for the series to make, only they didn't. Lisa is level-headed most of the time, but it's shown that she actually does have a bit of a rage problem when pushed. Now, originally Kite Man Hell Yeah was supposed to just be called Noonan's in reference to Noonan's Bar, the famous hangout for henchmen created by Garth Ennis in the comics. Yes, that Garth Ennis, the same man who created The Boys. Noonan's also just so happens to be where Kite Man and Golden Glider go to lick their wounds after their respective crappy days. We get introduced to our new supporting cast here too, some are returning favorites from Harley Quinn, like the Queen of Fables, who, yes, like everyone else, has been recast. Now she's voiced by Abbott Elementary's Janelle James, which is fitting because Halpern and Shoemaker showrun that series as well. Also, when we break it down, Kite Man is kind of just Tariq. If you know, you know. There's also a bunch of new faces too. My personal favorite is Gus, a kindergarten teacher by day who moonlights as a henchman at night. He's voiced by Rory Scovel, and he's actually one of the few things that gave me consistent laughs throughout this 2-pack of episodes. Now, you might be wondering to yourself, why on earth would Lex be willing to hire Kite Man for such an important job when he, knows how much he sucks? Because, I mean, geez, in the first season of Harley, Lex had Chuck waiting tables at the LOD parties, and well, I'll say this, they do actually come up with a good answer later. As you might guess, Kite Man screws up this simple job almost instantly and is grievously injured. An angry Lex, in an attempt to punish Chuck, threatens to buy Noonan's bar, which obviously Kite Man can't let happen because the barflies are like family and his only true power is kindness, meaning he better find a way to match Lex's $10 million bid soon or else. At first, Chuck thinks to ask his dad for a loan. We had met Chuck's parents back in Harley, and they were rich, waspy dickheads who hated their son for his lack of amazing powers, and the same is pretty much true here as well. Also, if it seems like I'm not spending a lot of time talking about the jokes or the comedy in this new show, it's because, well, and I hate having to say this, these first 2 episodes aren't exactly all that funny, more smiles than actual laughs, and in fact, this scene is a perfect encapsulation of why. Chuck's dad says he better get a vasectomy before he gets up to leave, and Glider just yells, well yeah, you better make it a double vasectomy, and that's the joke. She just said the same thing again, but louder. But it's not just that. I know part of Kite Man's appeal is that he's supposed to be so damn lame, and that's fine in small doses, but now that he has to hold up a whole show, he does so by making ancient Borat jokes and even older Wayne's World references. The series also has a glut of wacky side characters, but no actual comedic straight men. To borrow an even older at this point Simpsons reference, the joke is only funny when the sap has dignity, and so few characters in this show actually have dignity to speak of. With his dad a bust, Kite Man and Glider decide to look up Harley and Ivy because, hey, they were due for a cameo and this might as well get it out of the way early on. This joke did make me laugh because they do a big smash cut to Harley and Ivy's place accompanied by a few bars of their show's theme song. Harley and Ivy can't help because they're living the sapphic dream of finally owning vacation property on the Themyscira, which means it's only around this time do Kite Man and Glider remember that they're supervillains, so they might as well just gather a bunch of the bar regulars, including Bane, who got fired for recommending Kite Man in the first place, to steal $10 million from Kite Man's shitty dad. This means the first episode's big finale is a blood-soaked affair wherein many people end up dying in gory ways, except for Chuck himself, who manages to keep surviving at every turn, mostly just to him Forrest Gumping his way through the situation via dumb luck. It also sure helps that Golden Glider, as stated before, is a massive powerhouse, and when push comes to shove, she ends up activating the full force of her ability. She can turn intangible and supercharge her ribbon tendrils, causing massive death. Naturally, it's a power she doesn't like using all that often because it means she loses control and runs the risk of hurting someone she cares about. In the end, Kite Man doesn't even have to fight his own father, who actually respects this kind of initiative and opts to just give Chuck the money anyway to buy the bar, which of course is cause for much celebrating, but things are never as simple as they seem. Turns out Lex actually faked the attack on the LOD so the world would think that the anti-life equation was stolen. He then kills Sinestro to cover his tracks. Geez, I thought these shows only killed A+ Batman villains, before eventually opting to hide the anti-life equation at Noonan's bar, the idea being that Kite Man is such a loser of little consequence no one would ever bother looking for it there. Including the Lord of Apocalypse himself, Darkseid, who yes, has also been recast, this time with the legendary Keith David, who we gotta admit has been having a hell of a year between this, Has Been Hotel, and Hitmonkey, so you're not gonna hear me complaining. And it's all of that that leads us into episode 2. Now that Kite Man and Glider own the bar, they have to staff it, and we get some fun comic deep cuts, including Six Pack, another Garth Ennis creation with close ties to Noonan's. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the rest of Section 8 by the time everything is said and done. Now, despite Bane forsaking Luthor at the end of the last episode and helping Kite Man, Chuck still refuses to hire him for basically no reason. In fact, the whole episode acts like Bane didn't obviously and loudly quit the LOD at the end of the last show, and so we basically have to go through him quitting all over again in this one. And it's not the only time the story has shown major inconsistency either. Chuck thinks that the reopening of the bar will only be a success if they start hiring a cooler class of people, and then, as if on cue, Malice Wunderbar, daughter of Vermin Wunderbar, longtime Darkseid toady, ends up walking in. Malice is a hell of a deep cut given a major reworking here in this show. She's also voiced by What We Do in the Shadows star Natasha Demetrio. For all the problems Kite Man's first 2 episodes might have had, casting A-plus comedy voice talent certainly isn't one of them. Malice starts turning heads in the bar right away, and because her godfather has told her she needs to get a new job, Kite Man wants to hire her. Lisa hates the idea though because she sees Malice as one of those popular girls who has been so mean to her. And I mean, yeah, she's pretty shitty to everyone right out of the gate, so she's not wrong, though it is weird that Glider, who as I mentioned before is a super powerhouse, has such a bad opinion of herself. And if this feels like kind of a retread of Poison Ivy's internal conflict from the Harley Quinn show, you'd be right. The only difference is we don't actually know anything about Glider or what makes her tick, so building a whole episode around her inadequacies is such an odd choice. Also, I don't want to keep comparing Kite Man to Harley, but the great thing about that show is that it was a raunchy comedy clearly written from the female perspective, which made it feel so fresh in the realm of animation. Here, though, we have 2 women in a workplace going right for each other's throats right away, and it just feels reductive and old hat, like something from a long dead school of sitcom writing. Which, you know, it might actually have been an interesting concept if Kite Man tried to do this organically, maybe say something about the very nature of spin-offs and old sitcoms. I mean, hey, beloved character takes over a bar is a pretty classic trope in and of itself, but so far, Kite Man just seems to be doing this sort of stuff in earnest. An enraged Glider hopes that if she can get Lex Luthor and the LOD to come to the party, then maybe they won't need to hire Malice after all, and Chuck can look good in front of his father, who, again, didn't he just earn his dad's respect in the last episode? And in the Harley show, didn't Chuck stand up to his parents and decide he didn't need their respect? Again, anyway, inconsistencies all over the place. Lex agrees to attend, but in reality he plans to throw a much bigger party for himself, the idea being that Noonan's can't become too popular lest Lex's secret anti-life hiding place be found out. And again, I'm just over here thinking, we're really doing Lex as the big overarching villain again? Didn't we get enough of him in Harley already? What new material is there left to mine here? The DC Universe is this vast, all-encompassing thing, and we're just going back to the Lex Luthor well again, huh? Alright, I guess. There's also a B-plot in this episode too about the Queen of Fables going to work with Gus and ultimately stealing a new body for herself. It's actually shockingly dark when you stop and think about it, but Queen of Fables was always more evil than the rest of the villains, and honestly, I laughed more here than I did that in most of the other stuff in this second episode. All these unrelated plots end up converging when Malice's alien cat gets loose and runs amok in Gotham, meaning that Kite Man and Glider are forced to save not only the LOD, but indeed the city from getting destroyed. If nothing else, a massive rampaging animal proves to be great publicity for the bar. Oh, and also they both work through their interpersonal issues in a way that felt really undeserved and shoehorned. In fact, by the end of things, Glider is in such a good mood she ends up pulling a complete 180 on Malice and actively defends her from Darkseid, deciding to offer her a job running the bar's social media. Bane gets to be bouncer, and hey, that's the episode for you. And so that was Pilot Hell Yeah and Grand Reopening Hell Yeah, and if you couldn't tell, I felt like this debut for Kite Man was a little rough around the edges. Now, a lot of that is just the nature of the beast when it comes to making a spin-off to a popular show. For every Frasier, Better Call Saul, or Gen V, there's 10 other Joeys, Slippin' Jimmys, or That 80s Show. Everyone loves their favorite character and swears up and down that they would watch a whole show just about them, but then you finally get it and you realize that maybe it's not exactly what you wanted. Kite Man is a fun character that the Harley writers did an amazing job with, but so far, I don't think he's that deep or interesting enough to really hold up a show on his own. Again, he got popular because he was a meme. Now, the upside to that is because there's so very little actually set in stone about Kite Man, it means that the creative team is free to write whatever the hell they want, and maybe they will actually come up with something worthwhile. At its best, it feels like Kite Man really wants to recapture the more supervillain workplace comedy aspects of Harley Quinn season 1 and 2, but it struggles for a number of reasons. One, the jokes just aren't there. The material was already picked over, and it feels like they're retreading old ground now. And as I mentioned before, but it bears repeating, there are just so many wacky characters all jockeying for screen time in this thing, and when everyone is wacky, they all end up undercutting each other. I should also probably note that this is showrunner Dean Lorey's very first outing as a solo showrunner after having helped with Harley Quinn season 1 and 2, and sadly, it kinda shows. In fact, more than anything, what the first 2 episodes of Kite Man reminded me of was Powerless, another DC comedy series that has mostly been forgotten by time, and you know what? That's not a good thing. But I do plan to stick with the series, and hopefully they do manage to turn things around, and I end up eating these words.